have a lot of respect for him. I know he's not the only person who built the nation, but I think I believed that he actually shaped the nation to what we are today.
I don't think words can describe a person such as him. Being the founding father, I think he's an icon by himself. Just looking at him, he tells a story.
I think he has implemented a lot of controversial policies ever since independence. Some people may not like it, and I think, but as far as I personally think, it's for the overall good of Singapore and for the overall well-being of Singaporeans.
Mr. Lee, I've watched his speeches since I was a little kid, and he struck me as a man of integrity, a man with definitely highly talented, has his own views, and definitely not afraid to defend his views. So he may not be the most popular leaders among especially I guess the younger generation, but he stood for something, and he has delivered on whatever he's promised. So I think that is really what matters and differentiate him from other politicians who might just make lots of promises but do not deliver on them.
I went to school in 1967. I mean, that was when things really started moving, when we broke off from Malaysia and all that. So I would say that I actually experienced everything all the way through. So I'm very, very moved by everything that has been done. I've always believed that he is, I would say, I call him Mr. Singapore, because without him, I think nothing we do today would be, here.
He said in the foreword that he was glad he went to RI because there he had a chance of mixing with students of different races and of different backgrounds, income, I think the reference was to that. And I think that told me the kind of man that he was. When we talk of racial harmony in the country, for example, I thought I saw it there, that this man was glad that he had the chance to mix with people of different races and of different social standing. And this, I think, was reflected in many of his policies.
Whenever he makes very important speeches, he will even circulate to about 100 people getting input. And I've given him input where he called me back and even grilled me further to make sure he understood me. And I find him really very receptive to ideas and open to ideas. I even cross-sort with him, for example, on the issue of genes, which we all know he has very strong views. But I have strong views too about my own community and how the environment and nurturing is as important. And he listened to. And I think most important, if he thinks you are sincere, you're honest with your feedback, and do your homework, I think he will listen.
Mr. Lee was still Prime Minister. This must be late 80s, and I was Chairman EDB. I was somewhere in Jurong visiting companies. I received a call from his office. Can you come and see PM in Istana urgently? So okay, I got a car, take me to Istana, goes to his office, his personal office, and he was sitting there, asked me to sit down. So I sat down, and he looked at me, can you bring investments to Woodlands? I looked at him, so I replied, can you have an MRT station there? Words to the effect. He looked at me, I knew what I want, I knew what he wanted, I walked out. And that was how Woodlands got this. Apparently he called the Minister of Communication, that was it. And then what I did was, the moment I knew he would support, I pushed for the first project, Tech Semiconductor, to be based in Woodlands. We employed thousands of people, and the rest is history. But what I liked about him was that's it. He wanted something, I gave him an answer, he did it. No paperwork.
Last week, the nation was in mourning. For many of us, it was one of the most emotionally charged moments in our 50-year history as an independent country. It was an outcome we had been preparing for, but when it happened, we felt unprepared and perhaps emotionally limp. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was not just Singapore's founding Prime Minister. He is a national icon. with his passing, so much of what he achieved and much of what he had sacrificed for Singapore came into sharp relief. Quite a lot was what we already knew, but even more insights we hardly knew about the man came forward. The more we knew, the more indebted we felt, we feel, and the more intrigued we have become. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, or LKY as he is affectionately called, was certainly one of a kind. Just as much as he was known for his effectiveness as a leader, he was feared for his ability to neutralize anything or anyone who to him came in the way of his plan for making Singapore succeed. Yet he was known to be a man of integrity who had the utmost respect for the law. LKY, you could say, was a straight shooter, but he certainly cannot be described as straightforward, easy to understand. He was fascinating, compelling, complex, and complicated all at the same time. There's definitely an ongoing desire to understand Lee Kuan Yew. Welcome to Debate IQ. I'm Vishwa Sadashivan. Today's topic is understanding Lee Kuan Yew, or understanding LKY. To discuss the topic, we have on the panel with me, first, Joseph Conceicao. Hi, Joe. Say hi. An extremely charming, handsome man that I aspire to look like when I'm 90. And that's how old he is. And he was there when the PAP was formed in 1954. He first met LKY in Raffles College in 1940s. He served as a member of Parliament for Katong for 16 years, from 1968 to 1984. He also served as Singapore's ambassador 2 terms in Indonesia and also ambassador to Russia. Sorry, 2 terms in Russia and as ambassador, and then to Indonesia. Also on the panel is Yatiman Yusof, former MP and senior parliamentary secretary in the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and also the Ministry of Information, Communication and the Arts. Yatiman was also a former editor of Berita Harian, Singapore's Malay language daily. Next we have Siong Seng, affectionately called SS Teo. Former nominated Member of Parliament and presently serving as Chairman of Singapore Business Federation, or SBF. Siong Seng was also the immediate past President of the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And last but certainly not least is Chandra Mohan Nair, also a former nominated Member of Parliament. Chandra is a practicing lawyer, that he claims he does, and was a former President of the Law Society of Singapore. Gentlemen, welcome. As usual, we also have a live studio audience representing a wide spectrum of our society. Students, working adults, retirees, professionals, and others whose professions I believe we can't mention. Thank you for joining us today. Now, former Cabinet Minister S. Dhanabalan aptly described Mr. Lee as being, quote, not only honest, he was also ruthless in demanding honesty from his colleagues. He did not soften in his approach. He was very careful about establishing friendships with people. Joe, you claim to be a friend of LKY. Of course, he's not here to dispute that. From the 1960s, do you share Mr. Dhanabalan's view that he was a ruthless man in demanding honesty, or would you just say he was a ruthless man?
I think he was a ruthless man, not only in demanding honesty, but in demanding service, absolute service, the best you can give. Otherwise, his assessment of you falls a little bit, and maybe falls a lot. Now, if you ask me, where did he get this ruthlessness from? If you're old enough, you'll remember the Japanese came in and just discarded the British like that. And the British themselves did not show any ability to resist the Japanese. So Lee Kuan Yew, in my view, thought I mean, what's the use having the British around? They can't help. They can't help me. And when the Japanese come, they walked all over roughshod Singapore and stamped us down with their very, very cruel ways. And the ruthlessness that Lee Kuan Yew decided to take on himself was the ruthlessness he learned during the Japanese occupation. I think he has said that himself. And he believed that they did all kinds of horrible things, and people were scared and followed them.
And basically comes from the belief that there's virtually no margin for error. You know, therefore you've got to be ruthless, you've got to be exacting, you know. Yatiman, is that your, has that been your experience as well?
Well, I think, yes, he's ruthless in demanding honesty because he wanted to introduce policy that would be targeted in achieving the best outcome for the well-being of Singaporean. I remembered when I was invited for an interview to be a candidate for PAP, was at Istana. And that was in 1984 in April. And prior to that, there's been talk about the question of Malay loyalty, the non-inclusion of Malays in the armed forces, in the police, and certainly there were unhappiness among the Malay community about the defense policy of Singapore. So he asked me, do you believe that Singaporean Malays would be able to be loyal enough to defend Singapore? He looked at me, and I gave a reply. And I said, in a brutal, equally brutal manner, that if you have a Malay in the army and you train them sufficiently, when they're aiming the gun towards the enemy, before they pull the trigger, they will ask themselves 3 questions. First, whether they are full Singapore citizen, enjoying the benefit of everything. 2, whether they suffer discrimination. And 3, whether they are not a second-class citizen. And they have future under your protection for themselves and their families. If the answer, I said, is yes, they will not be hesitant to pull the trigger. But the answer is no. They will not pull the trigger. And I said, it is for you, person in charge, to show that you trust them. Because without trust, there will be no loyalty. You build loyalty of your citizens because you trust them. So that was essential. And I said, we didn't ask you to change your policy by reversing it immediately. You can do it face by face. And I think over the past 30 years, there has been some movement over this policy. And this, in 1970s, were crucial because when we started having Singapore as an independent country, we only have 2, Singapore Infantry Regiment. And out of that, almost all, if not 90% of them, consist of Malays. So are the police force. So I think obviously, when you have an independent nation, you want to have multiracial defense forces.
And that more or less represents the racial proportions.
So it is understandable for you to scale down the intake of the Malays into the army. But when it comes to national service, there were related problems because you are not called up for national service, you can't get employed. No employer will hire you because they are worried in case halfway through they are called up for national service and the employer will have to foot the bill for the salaries.
So essentially, Yatiman, if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that his ruthlessness was very closely correlated to pragmatism. A certain pragmatic and you know, almost brutally pragmatic orientation, you know, and it's not the same as discrimination. Sometimes the practice could appear to be discriminatory, but his objective is something larger.
His idea of posing the question actually to get to the bottom of the psychological makeup of the Singapore Malays then, and to assure him that if he moves along certain policy, that policy will benefit Singapore as well as
and
the
will
Malays
not backfire.
Too. So that was the ultimate objective.
Right.
Yeah?
Harasha, you have a comment on this? You have to use the mic.
Sorry, well, of course, I'm 40 years old now. About 20 years ago, I was a bit more of an angry young lady, and when I looked at, I was a sociology student, so we studied all these things, and the structural changes to the economy and the impact it has on the Malay community, all these things affected me. The defense policy, like Mr. Yatiman said, about not calling up national service, it did have an impact on a generation of men from the community at that point. But now, when I look back,
what was the impact?
The impact was not
feeling
a stable
clustered.
not a stable. No, it's practical. It's not a stable employment.
Okay.
Because no employer would want to invest time to train you and then not knowing that you just got to get called up to national service. So there was a clear impact, a structural impact for that generation. But now when I look back, honestly speaking, I understood why he felt that was a pragmatic thing to do. Honestly, if I was a man, and I was asked to defend my country, it would put me a bit of a psychological distress, especially a young person. You know what I'm saying? So I understand the logic behind why he did that. But as Mr. Yatiman says, I think things are slowly changing. But I understand now why he implemented that. I think that's important.
Right. I wish to add that following that discussion, there was a review of the policy that the government agreed to come up with a letter of release to say that so and so is not required to undergo national service. And with that letter, they have no problem getting jobs. So I think the discussion had actually benefited both the understanding about the defense as well as opportunity for Malays to find jobs. So I think we solved the problem, at least at that stage.
Maybe the word ruthlessness, to me, because I came from a Chinese school mainly until I switched to RI A level, I think in the Chinese, those of you, we call 霸气. 霸气 is like, I'm the leader, you have to listen to me. And we have a saying that, when there's fighting, there's chaos outside, you have to be in your tent, be stable, and also have the 霸气. Only the 霸气 are you able to control the situation. So I think he has that. And of course, if you look at all the TV, speeches that the way he talked was very, very
almost like a gangster.
Yeah. One part about productivity and all that. Forget about it. So I
almost like a
gangster. And they keep on repeating. So I think maybe the 霸气 has a bit overdone, and maybe he's a man who has a lot of things to do. I have come across him once in a dinner, and I mentioned just now, actually he told some very senior official off, in front of all of us. We were shocked the way he told people off, but maybe he's used to it. And in fact, that dinner we have in China, I think the senior civil servant all had gastric. I don't think they can eat. We could eat, right? Yeah. So but I think over the years, I think he has mellowed down. Okay, and I mean, I don't know him personally, but I was told that Mr. Lee was a very good factor to calm him down. And I guess, so I think the ruthlessness to me, of course, Mr. Danabalan said it, but to me, if I say in Chinese, it's 霸气. And 霸气 is something that you need in a leader. Right or wrong, and hopefully, over the years, they are more wrong than right. They are more right than wrong.
Well, and I think it's also about the times, right? I mean, in that period, that
it is
era,
the context.
The context.
He was very brutal and ruthless in asking that question because he had gone through experience of confrontasi, of how when we have the Indonesian army landed in Singapore exploding bomb in Johor, he went through the experience of the riot in 1964. right? And then in 1969, when there was a riot, May 13 in Malaysia, the spillover effect. So I think his understanding about the real possibility is understood by us.
No, but
I think
having said that, sometimes when an individual leader with the party is so strong, he may just keep making decisions without checking with others around him,
Well,
because
I mean,
his view may be skewed.
Well, I mean, Margaret Thatcher was a classic example of that,
right?
Yeah. She doesn't listen, but I think you have to change with time.
Yeah.
And maybe there was a man in a hurry, trying to do a lot of things and having the sense of urgency,
I
sense of
guess
crisis.
the question I'd like to ask all of us is, did he change with the times?
Yeah.
Did he really change with the time? And some people say he was the same person that he was in 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, in the 1980s. He was still, you cross him, he'll crush you. And if you look at some of the speeches he made in the 1980s and 90s even, were as powerful as they were, almost as party or paikia as he was in the 1960s and 70s. Sorry, Joe, you're going to say something?
No.
You're not going to say
No,
I heard a murmuring.
When you talk about him changing, it is a fantastic and tremendous change, because when I was in Raffles College with him, that was long ago, before the war, and when we had a fancy dress ball, he turned up dressed as a Malay with Songko and baju. He didn't have any problem with his idea about the Malay. Yeah. And when did he change? How did he change? And why did he change? That seems to me, even now, quite a mystery.
Yeah. I share Mr. Conceicio's view. I had the benefit of knowing Mr. Lee Kuan Yew when I was a journalist in the late 70s, and as an MP later as office bearer for over 30 years. I think fundamentally, when he believes on certain idea, he stick to it.
Yeah.
For example, the question of gene and environment. He stick to it. You can't change him. It is inherent in him. He believes that.
Yeah.
But in the manner of explaining, in arguing, I think he is willing to be a better listener now. I give you an example. We were talking about, this is over lunch. We have regular lunches in Istana where the food is always 3 pieces of potato chips, cut of fried ikan kurau, and a lot of spinach, a lot of fruits. That's all. But fundamentally, I think when we discuss about intense and soft culture, I think it was in his book too. By and large, he defined intense culture as the East Asian culture, owned by the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Taiwanese, Hong Kongers. And then the other side of Asia belonging to the soft culture, India, Indonesia, and the Malays into it. So I said, well, your observation may have seen that this is quite so. But within the two cultures, the world had evolved to work together harmoniously. And you cannot say that one culture must prevail over the other, So the two cultures must work together in harmony. So he accepted it. He did not talk about intense and soft culture anymore, because the Malays, the Indians, and the Indonesians will get very upset. You are saying that we are less capable than you, So these are the things that came out in the early 90s, where I think he is willing to listen to you, and his earlier belief will change, subject to the interaction he had with others.
Right. Yes, you had a point.
Hi. Actually, I just wanted to point out that actually maybe when we look at his policies and the decisions he made, we also need to look at the context and the time. So at that time, he needed fast action, and there was an immediate and very real threat from across the causeway. So that's why he might have been more harsh on the Malays. But as time went by, I thought that there might have been times when, or stages when, he could have reversed it a bit more, because even now I hear people complaining that even now within the military and especially the military in the top positions, there are still very few Malays who are able to reach to that height. Yeah.
So you feel that the change, even if it's taking place, is not palpable enough, it's not clear enough.
Yeah, because I would feel that many of my Malay friends now, they may still have relatives, maybe in Malaysia still, but it goes the same for the Indians and the Chinese as well. So I think we are very clear now that we are Singaporeans, and there shouldn't be as big a gap in that sense.
But we do have Malays now in the commando, in the Navy, and even as jet fighters.
No,
as jet pilots.
Not fighter pilots, yeah. But fighter? Yeah.
Yes, we do have.
So I think it's quite a significant progress, but I guess what you're saying is the context has changed significantly and people's expectations are also a lot higher. And if it doesn't happen, then it could affect trust at some point. You know, I just want to share with you, I'd like to go back to the point about ruthlessness. I want to share an experience that I've had. Not the one in Parliament. That's because I may start tearing if I talk about that. No, this was in the 1980s when I was the producer of the National Day Rally speech, and he was Prime Minister at Kallang Theatre. This was the rehearsal the night before the National Day Rally speech. So Mrs. Lee and he, PM Lee, would come at about 9:30 for a run-through, and they would stay till past midnight. And he had called, he had summoned me, instructed me to make sure that there is an engineer from PUB there present, because he wants the temperature on stage to be a particular specific temperature. I can't remember what it was, 24 degrees. I mean, I remember writing it down, you know, and then wondering whether I wrote it down correctly, you know. So of course I arranged for a PUB engineer. So there was this young engineer who came from PUB, looked like a fresh grad. Mind you, the whole auditorium is empty, right? Except for Mrs. Lee sitting in the front row. Mr. Lee was on stage, okay, and he walked to the lectern, and within seconds, he huffed and puffed and he said, "This place is freezing. Where is the engineer?" And the poor chap was standing right behind. And he quickly came to the front and he said, "What's the temperature?" And the guy went to the side of the stage and checked the thermometer and said, the correct temperature, 24 degrees or something. And then Mr. Lee glared at him and said, "What's the distance between that thermometer and where I'm standing?" You know? And the engineer said it's probably about 25 meters, 20 meters. He said, "Can the temperature vary in 25 meters? And then the gentleman, the poor guy, by this time his voice was getting more and more shrill, and he was saying, "Yes, but it depends on how many bodies there are in the auditorium." And he said, no, my question is, can the temperature vary in 25 meters? And he said, "Yes." "Then why didn't you put the thermometer where I'm standing? Isn't that the smart thing to do?" And he said, "You're dumb." And that's when I felt upset, you know. He said, "You're dumb." You know, and he said, "Which university did you go to?" Of course, it was NUS. You know. And
it wasn't Cambridge.
It wasn't Cambridge. Maybe it was Cambridge. He and said NUS. You know, but it was for me a very clear indication of it was ruthless, but he was exacting, and his argument was logical, right? In other words, if I am asking for the temperature to be this, you should then put the thermometer where I am, not where the temperature can vary. There's a logic to the argument.
Which is correct.
Which is
the
correct.
Spotlight will make it different.
But the problem is, the question I asked at that point was, did it have to be that harsh? Right? And what was interesting was, he was worked up. Mrs. Lee just called up to him and said, "Harry, and then he calmed down. So to a large extent, I think Mrs. Lee was a very powerful thermostat, was able to control the temp, but he was mercurial to a large extent. Now, I'm not passing judgment, I'm not saying but I think he got used to that because he needed to be tough and hard and demonstrate that this is no nonsense. If you don't get it done, you're out. You know the one mistake society thing. So that's, I think, what Mr. Dana referred to as a certain ruthlessness, and he's used to that because that's how Singapore was built and needed to be built. Yes.
I think my question is, we've all come across people like that in our daily lives, CEOs, people who are hard taskmasters. But my question was, if he wasn't like that, if he wasn't that demanding and exacting, could he then have been Lee Kuan Yew?
Or could we have come this far? Or could we have come up? It's a $1 million question. What do you all think? If he had softened his approach significantly more over the years, would we have come this far? Would we not have? Anyone? Views? Yes, lady behind.
I would think that he needs to be like that to build such a nation. He's very demanding. I heard you, as you mentioned, that how could someone be responding in such a manner to just the temperature issue. But although I have not personally met him, but I could sense that he is demanding and he's precise. He needs that accuracy.
Yeah.
And if that accuracy is not attained, then he will go on questioning. And because he's a curious man, he will keep asking until he gets his answer. But he may not be in the most best tones of his voice to do it, and it can be daunting on someone when asked in that manner. And he didn't mean to do it. He just was getting to the crux of the issue.
Yes.
And that's why he would do it. And that's how Singapore is built. It's how the foundation has been laid. It's how we were able to have what we have today. Yeah, that's my point of view.
Yeah.
Sure, whilst that may be relevant, what was asked of the engineer was, I want this room temperature to be 24 degrees. He's right, it's 24 degrees. So for a person to be fair and just, he should not have scolded that engineer just because he is slightly lower than the Prime Minister. So that's the making of a leader. A leader must set an example and not set high expectations unfairly on such an insignificant thing like a temperature in a room.
We saw a bit of that in the last elections, right? The last GE, when he basically said, if you don't vote for the PAP, then you will you need to repent. And when I heard that, I just rolled my eyes and I thought, there we go again. He's going on with the same message, right? For me, I actually think Singapore would be very much different. If you remember during Goh Chok Tong's time, they actually did a survey of cities around the world which they thought were very livable and which were thriving. And San Francisco, for some reason, came out as one of the top ones, right? With innovation and all that. And I think if they had rolled back a lot more of the draconian, policies or things where people were so afraid of taking risks on being spontaneous, I think Singapore would have been a much more thriving city where art would not necessarily have to be commercially driven, for example, where everything doesn't always have to focus on the dollars and cents, because there are other issues, there are other factors that determine what makes a city so livable and what quality of life is.
No, but talking about that alone, first of all, studies show that Singapore, the amount of money that the Singapore government spends directly on the arts is significantly higher than many other polities. That's one. But whether art has succeeded, that's a different issue. But in terms of spending, Singapore per capita spends significantly more than many other countries. Now, look at the clean and green. This is where people are. You see, this is a man who has that other side to him, right? How many leaders would come back in 1963 after a trip and say, I need to make Singapore green. And his whole point about making Singapore green, which today we are all beneficiaries of, and I'm particularly proud of that. Every time I come back from overseas, because we've all traveled to big cities, there is not a single city I've been to that has this kind of greenery all over the island. And I am so proud of the botanic gardens and many of the other parks, gardens by the bay. But in a small city that's so compact to have this kind of green. But it was his vision and his determination and ruthlessness in actually ensuring that he would actually go to examine the saplings and put it down. So everybody, including the gardeners, were terrorized. But the point is, without that terrorization, we would probably not have the canopy that you see as you drive down the ECP to the. So I think it is important that we acknowledge that there is a soft side to this man. He does try and look at those things. And a statement that he made, I just want to add, a statement that he made some time back about why clean and green, I'm paraphrasing, was that he said that green and parks should not be the domain of the rich and the wealthy who can afford it, which is the case in many countries. He said, everybody in Singapore should be able to step out of his home and enjoy the green just like his rich counterpart. And in today's Singapore, in the way many of the HDB estates are manicured, I think that happens. So I'm not defending him, but I think he's done some amazing things on the softer side as well.
There's another aspect that we have to look into. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is unique in the sense that unlike Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, Kwame Nkrumah, Jawaharlal Nehru, who were a unifier of a nation, even Sukarno, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was just not a unifier, but he was also a builder. So when at the stage of galvanizing Singaporean in facing crisis, he has to be seen as firm, able, and in full control. That adds to the perception that he appears to be quite brutal in his argument. That element is a requirement.
Yeah.
Without that, you can never unify a nation. But move Mr. Lee Kuan Yew into a person who builds Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew, the builder. That is where when you talk about greening of Singapore, it is his love, his passion, and his insistence, not brutality, that brings about the greening of Singapore. I think there are two stages of nation building where Mr. Lee Kuan Yew went through, and he's very unique in a sense because Sukarno did not build Indonesia, he united Indonesia. Ho Chi Minh passed over the leadership of building Vietnam after unifying it, after defeating South Vietnam. So was Mao Zedong, he passed into Deng Xiaoping. So, but Mr. Lee played the two roles as unifier and a builder. And you need to have that characteristic actually to deliver. And when you come to building, that is where the appeal for more conciliatory, more consultative approach that we talk about. But I think he is listening. When he passed over the leadership to Mr. Goh Chok Tong, I think there is a movement of firmness into conciliatory kind of mode. Something that Singapore has benefited over long term. I'm not defending him, but I'm stating the truth. This is the reality.
You are not defending him. I'm going to defend him. You know, everybody is saying things about him, his tough, his gangster, is this, that.
You also said it, no?
He has been also a kindly sort of person. Can you believe it or not? You know, before the 1981 elections, I fell ill because all members of parliament have to be examined before the elections.
Yes.
So I landed in Tan Tock Seng Hospital. And Chok Tong came and said to me, Joe, I think you better drop out. He said, we cannot, there's no time. Then I said, no. I was almost in tears, you know. I said, no. I asked Mr. Lee to come and see me. You know, he just came, he heard about it, he just came along. He was like an angel out of the out of a big blue bag or something like that. And then he said, "What's the matter, Joe? There's nothing that we cannot solve." This again, maybe you can say, another part of his character. You know, I said, "Nothing can solve. You want to stay on?" I said, yeah. "You want to continue?" I said, "Yeah." He went behind and he talked to some doctors. And the next day, I was on my way to the election. It was Tanjung Katong Girls' School. And I had a cuff on. And there were two people in white on either side, another person in white on the front seat. And we went to Tanjung Katong. This is something which I should not say really, but the two people who went with me were two doctors, and front was a male nurse.
Special treatment.
And we went there, and Katong is the second floor. But they brought it down, and I went there, and I blindly signed whatever was signed. I came back to the hospital, and he rang me up. He said, "Joe, despite your absence in Moscow, you won the election." It's been unopposed, same thing. And again, there was another incident, if you'll allow me. You know, in the next year, I was back in Singapore from Jakarta, and I was not feeling well. And when I reached home, my wife told me, "Kuan Yew wants to see you. Go straight away." I said, "What for?" He said, "You go and see him." So I went to the Istana, and I went to his room, and he said, leaned back and said, "You're scared." I said, "Scared of what?" "Yes, I think you're scared, Joe, you're scared." I said, "Scared of what?" "Of the operation." I said, "What operation?" Nobody. "Yes, you're not scared. You're willing to take the operation." He asked his secretary to ring up the hospital, and I went to the hospital. You know what? I was admitted immediately into the ICU block. And a few days later, I was in Australia having my heart bypass. The man saved my life, man. And there are stories like this. For he's a practical joker also. Have you ever thought of Lee Kuan Yew being a practical joker?
I think.
Yes, please.
If I can say, please, that his paternalistic and top-down policies had a lot to do with his belief in Confucianism and Asian values. And for example, acceptance of leadership, respect for the elders, and so on. Collectivism against individualism. And that brought him to the idea of hegemony, which he imposed and successfully implemented through acceptance, through consent, through coercion, but not force. And that was, I think, the basis of all his social engineering policies that resulted later.
Yeah, I think that is very well put. I think we have time. We are really overrunning, but we have time for one more anecdote, and I'd like to ask Joe to share an anecdote that you shared with me some time back about your contest with David Marshall.
Oh.
Right?
David Marshall, this is where the joke comes in, you know. The David Marshall wanted to contest Katong. And my helpers said, well, he's wasting his time. You're bound to, what do you want me to move around? And so I managed to get to his helpers and played on his impossibility of winning Katong. And eventually, he himself withdrew from the contest. But after the thing, when we were discussing matters, Lee Kuan Yew asked me, Joe, what did you do? I said, you frightened the man away. He said, what did you do? And he said, why did you make all this fuss so that you ran away? If you had gone on, I would have made you a great man debating with Master. I was not. So after that, we had a meeting in Parliament, and he said, you should not have done that. But anyway, he put his hands on his hips. And he said, to the people around him. Trust me, he said. That's what he wanted, you see. He did not want all these other things. He wanted the trust. And he said, trust me. And from then on, whenever I moved into Parliament House, all the people around would put their hands on the hips and say, trust me, Joe, trust me.
So the interesting point here is he's a master strategist as well, right? He didn't want him to have a walkover.
Yeah.
He wanted to see you defeat him in a proper contest. Because he wanted you to trust his judgment that you will win. You know. So when you combine all these factors and really at the end of the day, I think that's what we'll have to wrap here. That's what I'm saying. You know, end of the day, we are not here to be able to say with absolute certainty how Singapore would have turned out had he been softer, had he been. I don't think it's possible for him to be harder. But at the end of the day, Singapore is where we are to a large extent certainly because of the way he has been. Right? But the question we have to ask is, some of the price that we had to pay along the way, right? The fear, people pulling out, people being afraid to speak, even depoliticization to some extent, where people are not willing to step forward into politics. Singaporeans are becoming very calculative, monetary in our references. You know, all these things are the unexpected, unintended side effects of that speed with which we came. And the question is, you know, was it necessary? And I guess that's a question that we need to address in the decades to come. You know, and on that note, it leaves me to thank once again my panelists, you know, Joe, Chandra, Yatiman, and SS for joining us. And of course, you, a wonderful studio audience. You raised some very thought-provoking and somewhat even funny comments. Do not let the debate end here, home audience. Log on to our website, www.inconvenientquestions.sg, and join in the discussion. And don't forget to like us on Facebook and watch our previous debates on our YouTube channel. And to tune in to part 2 of Understanding LKY next week. Remember, you ask, they answer, we make it happen.